down with customers, what's the approach that you take to actually help them map out their strategy?
Where we start with customers is, I think, is largely dependent on where they're at in their journey. So for customers who have no strategy in place, I mean, we need to start at the beginning, which is, what are the use cases? What are your users doing? Understanding, doing that user segmentation model that we talked to earlier, understanding the right fit, how we can help them achieve their goals. For customers who are potentially some way into that journey and have identified some of those things, it's, well, we need to take a step back and look at the technology that perhaps have adopted already and finding out where that fits and is it cohesive with the broader strategy. Because we do see some customers who have done the strategy work but have gone straight into one of the elements of that and invested heavily into solutions to address that one need, but haven't thought about the context to the broader strategy, which can involve, introduces complexity, can involve rework and whatnot. So we can either develop strategies for our customers, or we can help review the strategies they've already got in place to determine where they're at on their path and how we can assist.
So Dave, when you sit down with a customer and talk through their approach to mobility and how they're looking to equip their organisation to adopt mobility and get the most out of it, how do you approach it?
Look, once we've got the strategy in place and we understand their roadmap and what they're trying to achieve over a period of time, we need a framework to map their objectives through to tangible things that we can deliver to support those requirements. And Data#3 have developed a mobility framework which is all-encompassing to do exactly that. So we start at the top by looking at our users, and by users we define them as potentially internal users, external users, trusted or untrusted users. So that accounts for staff, partners, potentially contractors, or a myriad of things. Below that layer, we look at devices. And device could be, as we've talked about today, it could be many things. It could be desktops, it could be laptops, tablets, mobile devices, or even wearables, and then increasingly machines. Below that is the workspace services layer. And this is really the abstraction layer from the complexity of IT. This is what the users and the devices are experiencing. Content services, so here we're talking about data services and print services and things that are largely tied to users and devices as opposed to collaboration systems, which I'll talk to shortly. Then we've got a service catalogue. The service catalogue is all things that deliver the experience that the users are interacting with. So for example, this may include a workspace portal. The portal might be the single place that the user goes to get access to their legacy business applications, their SaaS applications, links to intranets, etc. Collaboration is really, I guess, the extension of the content I talked to earlier, but how it pertains to a mobility strategy. In the true sense of our mobility framework, we're not going into the depths of what collaboration means, but it's more so how a mobility strategy can support the use of collaboration technologies in your business. And finally, in the workspace services layer, we've got identity and authentication. So this is how do we deliver that one log-on experience to the users. So again, everything in this workspace services layer is about abstracting the complexity of IT from our users and our devices. So in the workspace delivery layer, we're really talking about the technologies that deliver the services up into that workspace services layer. This comprises physical desktops, virtual desktops or VDI, application virtualization and streaming technologies, application remoting technologies. This also includes mobile app stores, be they publicly facing mobile app stores or internal app stores. And finally, SaaS applications. So finally, the core services layer at the bottom here is the underpinning infrastructure that supports everything in the mobility framework above it.
So Dave, it's a comprehensive framework that covers users, devices, services, delivery, underlying core infrastructure. Does a customer have to take it as an entire framework, or how do they apply bits and pieces?
Yeah, no, not at all. The reason it's a framework is it is a frame of reference to understand where you are and what you're trying to achieve. So for example, if a customer already has an initiative around content, we can use this to understand what they've delivered so far and how that may interact with other elements in the framework. This is coming back to our earlier conversation around the tactical solutions versus strategic view. We need to make sure that customers aren't making tactical decisions at the expense of complexity. So we can use this framework to help drive that conversation and ensure that we're looking at their overall strategy and how the connection between the elements can come about. Doing this can reduce complexity, it can reduce cost, not only through the acquisition of technology, but also through the ongoing support of that technology.
So it can be actually used to evaluate the completeness of their existing strategy?
Absolutely. So it can be used in many ways.
I was going to say, like, MDM's a really good example of I guess, how we can utilize this framework. A lot of organizations today that we deal with will have an MDM solution in place. What they typically don't, and they've typically purchased that technology because they need to manage the device. What they're not actually taking into consideration is all the additional functionality of that, because nobody actually just does MDM anymore. So, you know, we're able to take our framework and assess that against their particular investments and actually help them return more or get more from what they've already purchased. By, you know, if we look at collaboration or identity and access management or service catalog, the technology, the investments they have made, we map this framework into those investments to ensure that they get more return on their investment.
And to validate that it's the right investment moving forward.
Absolutely, and to highlight where there potentially could be gaps.
Yep.
And then the framework allows us to actually fill those gaps based on strategies and the outcomes, that the business outcome that the customer is actually trying to achieve.
It also facilitates what drives what. So it's not, as we were talking about before, it shouldn't be about a technology-based solution or core infrastructure driving a user experience, for example. This demonstrates that going on that journey starts at the user, okay, and it progressively moves down, and really the last component is the technology.
Absolutely.
So it's certainly a very structured approach, a methodical way of understanding what enterprise mobility means to a customer and how it can benefit their organisation.
I guess one other point I wanted to make on the mobility framework is that it doesn't have to be completely adopted. We've got some customers who have a specific need to drive growth in a particular part of their business, and they're able to leverage elements of the mobility framework to drive applications into a certain subset of their users. For example, a large retail chain had the part of their business who had a need to drive some efficiencies into their sales force. Were looking to circumvent IT to roll out new applications to that team. But by using the mobility framework, it allowed them to ensure that we had a consistent way to deliver that service that was supportable, didn't circumvent any compliance or any risk concerns. So that's one example of where just one application onto one mobile device in one use case is something that, you know, can deliver value to the business without having to address every element of the framework.
The other thing is that as technology evolves, the framework still remains relevant in that the core foundations and the core layers associated with that framework are still challenges that as a business you need to address. So it's always going to be, technology is always going to evolve, but the underlying principles will still remain the same.